according to the latest report by Alibaba to the world. 59% jump year on year. That's really quite something, Mr. Huang.
Yes, it is amazing, really.
Especially when it comes to revenues. Before, it was mainly talking about the volume, and now it reports separately, both the volume and the revenue. What does that mean?
I think that's give a more clear indication on the Alibaba's accomplishment, in particular, which part coming to the company directly, which part is actually the merchandise and the revenue, not the Alibabas necessarily.
And we have seen, Professor Liu, not only that because customers are using computers, but rather they're using smartphones. In fact, that number has hugely increased, exceeding those coming from the customers who are using computers. What would that mean for a e-commerce platform like Alibaba?
Well, I think China's continue to offer a large room for Alibaba to grow, so there's no really ceiling. Number one, given the improvement in the infrastructure, like the mobile and 4G penetration into the users market. The other is that they're also spreading more from the urban area to the rural area. And so the business sophistication level of Alibaba is also there to generate more customer base.
All right, Professor Wolff, what do you make of the performance of Alibaba for the time from the beginning of the year until June? How is that performance compared to, let's just say, its international counterpart like Amazon and some of the others?
Sure. So, I mean, there's a much faster growth rate than we're seeing from anything else very large. To get year-over-year growth that's basically 60% on the top line for revenue, like we saw from Alibaba, is very unusual. That's a small company growth rate because small companies deal with smaller numbers. So certainly interesting. What's most interesting to us is that Alibaba has very well positioned itself at a bunch of crossroads for very rapid growth. So twice the growth rate, almost 115% growth rate in mobile and in cloud and in digital content. So what we see is that Alibaba is also becoming a leader in entertainment content and also becoming the leader in cloud services and also becoming a leader in mobile commerce. And that means that they're very well positioned for the future. And those are growth trends that we know haven't even reached their apex. So a great quarter, and maybe even more excitingly in the forward-looking context of the market, good indication of future growth as well.
Mr. Huang, at the same time, we've seen the advertising revenue on Alibaba's e-commerce platform has been increasing quite dramatically. And what would that mean? Because usually it depends on the revenue coming from the sellers and also from the transactions, but this time more on advertising.
I think that says Alibaba's the power or marketing capability expand in China. I think people in the U.S. may have some challenge to comprehend such a faster
astronomical
growth.
Figure when it comes to growth rate of 59%.
But yeah, and within the 59%, obviously there were some of the revenues coming from acquisition. Even you take that part away, just incremental and growth is also very phenomenal. I think it's about 49%. I think the people need to understand that the e-commerce, the impact to the traditional business in China is a lot bigger than in the US. As I agree with Professor Liu, so that's why if you think about ceiling and for China's and e-commerce company, this ceiling is a lot higher than in the US.
Having said that, though, we're not here to do any specific advertisement for any specific company. The reason why we're talking Alibaba is because it's quite a business phenomenon. It is one of the biggest companies in the world, particularly originally coming from China. Having said that, Mr. Huang, there's one issue, of course, the SEC investigation, the probe SEC has been doing about Alibaba for what they call possible violations of federal securities laws. That was, of course, the accusation. The probe began in May. Now, several months have passed. This time, Alibaba, when made public, all these recent revenue and sales figures did say something about this probe. And yet, what it says is no update. So how should we understand, on the one hand, the very impressive number, once again, coming from Alibaba. On the other hand, the investigation seems to still going on, yet we do not know what exactly it is, at which stage it is.
It's quite normal for a publicly traded company executive not comment on the ongoing investigation, unless if the CEO is Donald Trump. That could be a totally different story.
Well, I'm not sure whether that comparison is necessarily viable at this moment, but go ahead.
So I think that's a normal practice, not comment on the ongoing investigation. I think that's quite normal.
Right, but having said that, Professor Wolff, that's exactly the issue here, isn't it? I mean, the SEC investigation, some suggest that has a lot to do with the astronomical figure Alibaba reported worldwide about its sales on the Singles Day, which of course is a man-made festival here in China, in which they purchase online just to celebrate so-called intimate relationships in a way. But having said that, what do you think, Professor Wolff, of the probe and now this new seasons of numbers being made public coming from Alibaba, and yet no update according to the company?
So I would also say that generally we don't see a willingness to publicly comment, particularly if you're in talks with the regulatory authorities in the US. So generally we see it either as a non-issue or slightly positive. When a management declines to comment, it usually means that they're in the thick of negotiation, possible settlement, and discussion with the regulatory agency. So not usually bad news there. I think we do see Alibaba trying to get more culturally aligned with the greater expectation of transparency. And we've seen a long history of even leading Chinese companies, of which Alibaba most certainly is one, having some difficulty adjusting to the different normal reporting. And by the way, every country has slightly different reporting standards and norms. There's always an adjustment period. And part of what I think we see now is that, but everything that Alibaba does, because it's so successful and so large, is done under a brighter and a little bit more searing spotlight than normal. And I don't think that I would interpret this negatively at all at this point.
Professor Wolff, according to Alibaba, not long after after it voluntarily announced the SEC was doing an investigation and a probe toward it, it said also to the media, here I quote, it has been providing through its legal counsel, quote, requested documents and information to the SEC, end of quote. And yet we know, Professor Wolff, the argument from both sides is how much information Alibaba should provide to SEC. According to the current Chinese system, there are certain informations that Alibaba shouldn't and could choose not to provide. Well, the SEC prefers the other way around. So that is really the controversy. Is that a controversy a company can change? Or is that a controversy that the two governments really have to take time to work it out?
Yeah, so to see a real solution here, we need the regulators to work this out. What's happening is that the U.S. Investigative Authority is requesting the company release internal documents. And remember, what's listed here is the variable interest entity, or the U.S. sort of subsidiary vehicle for the Chinese company, and Chinese law has historically been pretty clear that those kind of requests should not be made directly by a foreign regulatory agency to a Chinese company. That's obviously something that needs to be fixed at the regulatory or at the national level, and it's not on the responsibility of, nor is it under the control of, an individual company, Alibaba or any other company.
Professor Liu?
Well, I think compliance is the bottom line for any company to operate in any type of market. So therefore, given the differences of different jurisdiction, so Alibaba is really put in a predicament, whether to comply with Chinese law or to comply with the U.S. law. But ethically, I would think that once they begin to operate in the U.S. security market, they got to follow the U.S. law and got to comply with that. I think, yes, the Chinese government regulators need really to find a way to work out a smooth cooperation, because we're going to see more of this type of Chinese companies are going to be listed, in the U.S. Financial market and vice versa.
Of course, the two sides, I mean, SEC and also China's CSRC has reached certain kind of agreement, but that was only on very specific cases, and it was about criminal investigation almost. But on a larger scale, we're still far from it, right, Mr. Huang?
I think so. That's a dilemma for almost every U.S. listed Chinese companies. At one side, you're listed in the U.S., you have to follow the SEC law or regulation. On the other hand, as being a Chinese company, you have to listen the order from Chinese government. It's a kind of dilemma for every company. On the other hand, I actually see this as maybe an opportunity for Alibaba to transform itself from a leading Chinese company to a truly global company.
What do you mean by that?
Because that's firstly, it's more transparent. Secondly, you follow more like international accounting standard, and etc. And also for their executives and how you handle this situation, and they be a more professional way, and also get better trained, etc. I think it is an opportunity for them to transform themselves up.
This is certainly a learning curve for them in a way.
Yes.
But, Professor Wolff, Alibaba is a listed company. At least at the very beginning, when the investigation was made public, there was some ups and downs to the Alibaba's stock, internationally speaking. So the question is, how much can a company shoulder the risks of being investigated and the name tag on its forehead that is being investigated, at least to the stock market?
Yeah, so it's a good question. Clearly, the result of the investigation is probably a bigger determining factor than the existence of an investigation. Inquiries and investigations are not uncommon, and inquiries and investigations don't always result in, a bad outcome. So I do think the outcome matters more than the process. And we have seen the shares, by the way, recover and regain past lost ground. Ultimately, unless we see a material decline in the ability of this company to have earnings and revenue growth, or if we find a major finding. So the other thing I think is if they were found to be 100% at fault with everything under inquiry, it would not be existentially threatening to the company. So we should keep in mind that even if everything that's being looked at comes out in the worst possible way for Alibaba, it is a continuing concern with a reasonably bright future regardless.
Professor Liu, do you agree?
Yeah, I would agree that I think the anxiety and confusion among the U.S. investors really prompted the SEC probe into this case. And U.S. investors, they are seeing that the Chinese economy is on a downward pressure. How can a Chinese company really perform, so well? It's too good to be true. But if the result turn out it is good and it is true, so then they're going to earn a plus. But at the moment, it is not only the books that are need to be investigated, but it is really the counterfeit product that really creates a real problem among those investors and consumers.
We are seeing Alibaba facing quite a number of challenges. One of those challenges is counterfeiting. The other challenge is how would the new business models that Alibaba has been working on over the years be able to be realized? In other words, how can they find new cash cows? Okay, here is a driverless car, right? There is also the Ali Yuan, which is cloud computing. But none of them has yet been the cash revenue generator so far, even though it is enjoying some growth. On the other hand, there's also the counterfeiting issue. There has also been some issues related to various regulations when Alibaba going to different markets, going to Southeast Asia, going to the United States, and many of these different markets. So, Mr. Huang, how do you think Alibaba is juggling at this moment?
I think a counterfeit issue is really a challenge for Alibaba. And put that one aside, I know Alibaba tried a lot of new things. As you mentioned, they has not been see the revenue yet. But just in its current business, I don't think they are running into a ceiling yet, at least in the next quite a few years.
59% growth, I mean,
yeah,
that's impressive.
It
but
is
things
impressive.
change fast.
Yeah, but you look at the percentage of online company revenue, compared to the overall revenue, still small percentage. So lots of room for Alibaba to grow.
All right. Professor Wolff, do you agree? Among all of these challenges, which one is
Yeah,
the most important?
So, I mean, look, I think they also have a challenge with how they do internal advertising on search inside China. When you're a big, complicated company in multiple lines of business, you will always have many opportunities and many challenges. I still think that Alibaba sits at the crossroads of mobile, e-commerce, the emergence of the Chinese consumer, and a desire for digital content. So it is theirs to lose, and they're the biggest player in the biggest, most dynamic market in the world, and almost any other company would be envious of that position. I think that will still be the case in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, and 24 months.